Yeah, so can people who just joined see that comment in the chat that I have there? I don't know if those stay up. It has a link that I'd like everybody to go to. If you log into the website, you're going to be able to provide some information interactively during the presentation. Can you guys see that, or should I repost it?
I don't see it, Patrick.
Thanks. Out. Okay, here we go. Reposted. So that link there, pollev.com/Patrick Belmont 912. If you just go to that website, Paul and I just want to start out by getting a little bit of information from you all. It's one of the awkward things about doing these Zoom presentations. It's great that we can connect from all over the place, but we don't really get to know each other, see each other. So this will, if you go there, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions in a second here, and that'll allow you to provide information. So while you're logging into that, I'll share my screen and we'll just get this underway. You see that okay?
Yep, can see that. And Patrick, I'll repost that link for folks that are joining us after you posted it.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. So here's the first question. Oh, got a bunch of answers already. In one word, if you can, what's your primary discipline? If you put in multiple words, they'll end up getting separated. But, I'm just curious to see who we've got on the call here. So a bunch of geomorphologists, I love to see that. Sustainability, ecology, engagement, planning, environmental science, plant pollinator, conservation. Awesome. Okay, that's great. That gives me a good sense. I gave a talk last Friday for Simon Fraser, and we had folks from robotics, we had folks from architecture. So this is great. Awesome. Okay. Second of three questions for you. In one word, how do you feel about climate change? One word. I know that's hard. If you absolutely have to do two words, put a hyphen between them. Alarmed? And while we're populating these, I'll say that I have shamelessly stolen this from the wonderful Catherine Hayhoe. Saw her do this in a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I just think it's so important to get to know your audience in this way and to share some of these thoughts. So I want to give her credit for that. Urgent, overwhelmed, worried, nervous.
And Patrick, the larger the word means that several people have typed that in.
Right. Yep. Okay. Last question. I believe humanity's response to climate change is, A, do you think we're moving too fast? Are we right on track? Is it a bit too slow? Is it way too slow? Has it essentially not started yet? Or none of the above? Okay. All right, we're down towards the bottom here. Well, thanks for doing that. It seems like we've stabilized here at about 77% of us thinking it's way too slow and 23% saying it's not started yet. So that really gives me and Paul a good sense for who we're talking with here. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and he's going to talk to you for a bit, and then I'll come back at the end.
Great, thank you, Patrick. And hope Paige will let me know if there's any problems with the audio or with the screen share. It's great to be with you and talk with you a little bit about what many of us, I think, can relate to, probably as employees of the land-grant universities. We're going to try to answer these questions. What can and should the responsibility of land-grant universities be in the Anthropocene? And we want to explore this question of how can campus climate planning serve as a model for student and citizen learning and engagement. And we're defining the term planning very broadly here today. Planning in this context will incorporate curriculum development, community outreach programs, campus policy implementation, and those kinds of things. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're operating today under a couple of assumptions, and we hope you'll bear with us with these assumptions. The first is that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, pretty much has things right, has the data, the forecast, the scenarios correct with the past, the present, and moving forward. This is some data that was provided in a recent lecture from Dr. Rob Davies here at MSU back in February of 2020. And I've given all the sources for the slides, for the material on the slides at the bottom of these. And we'll be happy to provide this to our organizers at the end of this presentation. So we have about 300 gigatons of CO2 left in our budget, again, according to the IPCC. And this 300 gigatons is under the assumption, again, based on the best available data, the best available science, that we still only have a 2/3 chance of staying below this critical 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold at our current emission rates. And you can see here what our proven reserves are. So what our budget is to exceed that 1.5 threshold versus what our budget is. There's a great disparity there. And I just want to share with you, so I think many of us would recognize that the climate crisis is upon us with just a few years left to mitigate what many assert as the potential for unprecedented disruption, threatening the prospects for human life. And I like to share, as a political scientist, MIT linguist and political dissident Noam Chomsky, who I think very bluntly says, we have to make decisions now which will literally determine whether organized human life can survive in any decent form. And this is perhaps, I think, further described very well by Sir David Attenborough, the UK naturalist, who says, the Holocene is ended. The Garden of Eden is no more. We have changed the world so much that scientists say we are in a new geological era, the Anthropocene, the age of humans. Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilization and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. And we hear this again, this message repeated most recently by UN Secretary General Guterres, who said of the latest IPCC report that the alarm bells are deafening, the evidence is irrefutable, and the IPCC says that the evidence is unequivocal. So that's our first assumption. Our second assumption is that land-grant universities have a mandate to serve the people of their states. And I think this is fairly well described in the Organic Act of the Land-Grant Universities, the Morrill Act of 1862. And I want to provide some evidence, some information from the Association of Public Land-Grant Universities. They are an organization of leading public research universities and university systems in Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and they include land-grant universities. They've produced a foundational statement titled "The Knowledge Zone of Ideas, Progress, and Free People." And in it, they talk about the Morrill Act. They describe the Morrill Act that it was intended to provide a broad segment of the population with a practical education that had direct relevance to their daily lives. According to the APLU, land-grant universities all have the public purpose of educating students, undertaking research, and again, importantly for the purposes of our talk today, contributing solutions to the problems facing their regions, countries, and the international community at large. And they go on to say in this document that land-grant universities are uniquely positioned to address the challenges and opportunities facing the continent. They must contribute to the solutions and progress of the region through education, joint research, and collaborative problem solving. And I think that this message was also preceded by Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Morrill Act into law, and his quote about this act and the purpose of the act is really operating under the confidence of the people. that we have a fiduciary to uphold this act and the public trust that really envelops this idea. It's an obligation. I think it's a legal obligation, and I would suggest it's a sacred obligation to alert the public or to inform and educate on risks and threats to health, welfare, and safety. And I think this includes specifically our obligation to alert the public of the current climate crisis that's unfolding. And I think to consciously not uphold that fiduciary is a political act. Because the prime directive, if you want to use maybe a Star Trek analogy, of universities, the prime directive is to educate. And land-grant universities, I think, are obliged to uphold this confidence that Lincoln spoke about. So the question moving forward is, are land-grant universities living up to their intended responsibilities and standards? And how could land-grant universities better function in the Anthropocene? And there's lots of examples in the scholarship documenting and critiquing land-grant universities and public universities in general. And for the purposes of this talk, we don't have time to go into that very rich literature base. But I'd like to offer 6 areas where I think land-grant universities could better function in the Anthropocene. The first being declaring a climate emergency. To date, there have been more than 7,000 colleges, universities, and technical schools and community colleges all around the world that have declared a climate emergency. And we can think of an emergency just simply defined as a situation that requires immediate action to prevent a catastrophic outcome. And I don't think anyone who has studied the climate issue would take issue with that. So according to the UN spokesman that you can see here, that's quoted in this piece, declaring a climate emergency changes the nature of the urgency in higher education. So specifically, what does this action do if a land-grant university were to do this? To me, I think it's more than just a benign statement. It sends the message to students and to the rest of the campus community and to the citizens across the state that they serve and beyond, that a land-grant university understands the severity of the problem, and it takes very seriously the necessary steps through education, planning, and policy. The second area that I think land-grant universities can do is to draft and update climate action plans. And this screenshot is from Second Nature, which is from their website. It's an organization that's charged with coordinating university climate commitments. And land-grant universities can certainly sign on to what they call the President's Climate Leadership Commitment. It's formally the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. And it involves a university president or chancellor signing a pledge that says, quote, they believe firmly in the power, the potential, and the imperative of higher education's key role in shaping a sustainable society. It says that they believe deeply, that they're deeply concerned about the increasing pace and intensity of global climate change and the potential for unprecedented detrimental impacts. And they understand that technology infrastructure, global interconnectedness, and their greatest assets, engaged, committed, smart students, allow land-grant universities to explore bold and innovative solutions to lead in climate action and sustainable solutions. So that's in part what the pledge says. And again, I think that this, like declaring a climate emergency, it sends a very clear message that the university takes seriously the situation and it intends to act deliberately. So by signing this pledge, universities agree to identifying climate neutrality dates, to drafting a detailed climate action plan, and reporting annually on this public site. And for a marginal cost for Montana State University, it'd be about $4,000 annually. They join a consortium of other universities and are provided access to resources, professional guidance, in-kind services, and the potential for pro bono consulting on climate action planning with the longest standing voluntary carbon reduction program in the world. And through it, this climate leadership network of over 600 universities and colleges. And I've done an inventory of land-grant universities with the help of a student, Gabe, who's joining us today. And out of the 112 land-grant universities, there are only 25 that have signed on to the President's Climate Leadership Commitment. The third thing that I think land-grant universities can do is to mandate climate curricula. Creating a climate literate student body is not just aligned with the land-grant university mandate, but it's also a potential recruiting tool. You can see from this article in The Guardian recently, they say, quote, survey after survey shows young people are not just incorporating new climate conscious behaviors into their day-to-day lives, they're in it for the long haul. College administrators say surging numbers of students are pursuing environmental related degrees and careers that were once considered irresponsible, romantic flights of fancy compared to the more stable paths like business, medicine, and law. And a 2020 University of Southern California study found that 64% of undergraduate students are very interested in on-campus sustainability, and 27% are interested. And a 2021 Pew Research report found that Gen Z individuals, those are individuals who are up to age 25, are overwhelmingly worried about climate change. 76% of them say it's one of their biggest societal concerns, while 37%, according to this Pew Research poll, make it their #1 concern. So I think land-grant universities could certainly do more to ensure that climate courses are part of core curriculum requirements, including stressing the intersectionality of climate justice and racism and poverty and equity issues. I want to share just one other related issue here. Data from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications offers some really intriguing information across the United States, and I pulled this information from Montana. Interestingly, the data shows that Montanans, 65 to 81% across the state, agree that schools should teach about the causes, consequences, and potential solutions to global warming. So I think there's great evidence out there that there's support, wide support among the public to offer and indeed even mandate these kinds of courses. Fourth, I think land-grant universities could be involved in divestment and green capital campaigns. And the organization here, Go Fossil Free, reports that globally, the divestment movement has moved nearly $15 trillion of assets from over 1,300 institutions like universities and faith-based organizations and governments out of fossil fuel investments. And we've seen most recently Harvard committing to divest its $42 billion endowments, and the University of California announced last year that it's divested from fossil fuels, from all fossil fuels, removing them from its $126 billion investment portfolio. And the University of California has over 285,000 students, and so it becomes the largest educational system in the nation to shed these assets in favor of more green assets. And there's also a strong divestment movement from some faculty regarding their TIAA pension accounts. This is the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association, which is a Fortune 100 financial service organization. It's the leading provider of financial services in the academic sector. And also, for those of you that are investing your pension funds in the Montana Public Employees Retirement Administration, there's currently no social choice option for those 55,000 employees and retirees involved in that Montana system. The fifth thing, Extension, which is the outreach arm of land-grant universities, could certainly be doing more in terms of climate outreach. I just want to talk briefly about this new group, the National Extension Climate Initiative. It was established 2 years ago by a group of faculty who were concerned that more leadership was needed within and between states and regions, and most importantly, at the national level, specifically on this topic of climate change outreach within the Extension land grant system. So the group now meets monthly. They share resources, they provide networking opportunities, and they better coordinate. They work to better coordinate climate education outreach activities across the Extension system. Now, a group of individuals just completed the most comprehensive inventory on extension climate programs to date, including interviewing extension faculty and administrators about their work experience. And that report is available on the website that's offered there at the bottom of the slide. And the results were really alarming. There were very few climate change programs in extension, most of which were community or state-based, very few at the national or regional level. There were very few programs focusing on youth or tribal programs, as well as those addressing intersectional issues, as I mentioned before, race, equity, and justice. And the results also showed reports of censorship by supervisors, climate change denial among work peers, a fear of retribution for engaging in climate change programming, and a lack of resources and support from both peers and supervisors. And the group is now working with administrators and funders on a more coordinated national approach. The last thing I'd like to offer is this work from Robert Kopp, who is a professor at Princeton. He's published on this idea of climate grant universities. So we have land grant universities, we have sea grant universities, we have space grant, and he's offering this idea that the United States should establish a system of universities focusing specifically on climate education, on climate outreach, kind of democratizing the knowledge base that's involved with climate research and communications, and do it using the same model, using the land grant and Morrill Act kind of principles. So I think that the time is right now for thinking about this paradigm shift, not just within the land grant university systems, but with new ideas like the climate grant idea. And I think that all of these 6 ideas that I've offered are ways to better engage students and citizens in discussing and acting on the critical issues of climate change. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Patrick to talk a little more specifically about his experiences at Utah State University. Patrick.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks so much, Paul. Great insights there. So I'm just going to spend about 3 more minutes reiterating a couple of the points that Paul started with, and then maybe 4 or 5 minutes talking about how things have gone at Utah State University over the past couple of years, because I think there's some good lessons to learn there. And I want to start with this plot. So this is a plot of global energy consumption from all these different sources over time. All, coal, oil, and gas have gone way up over the last, half a century or more. All global renewables, all wind, solar, hydro, it's all represented by this thin green band here. So this is the plot that I think about this plot multiple times a day. How do we turn this around? This is the thing that really scares me. If I can find a way to turn this into a Halloween costume, this is what I'm gonna dress up as for Halloween this year. Because this is scary. I mean, to see a trend like that and to think we've got to turn that around. That's the goal. And all these other things we talk about, they don't really matter unless we turn this around. So there's one plot that I wanted to sear in your mind. Paul started out talking about the carbon budget that we have. And here's another way to represent that. So this box represents all of the carbon humans could put in the atmosphere before we reach 1.5 degrees warming. The purple is what's already spent. This purple in this smaller purple box here is what we spent just between 2008 and 2017. The blue is what we had remaining as of January 1st, 2018, about 580 gigatons. And as Paul pointed out, that translates to burning just about 5% of known hydrocarbon reserves. Now, this notion that we're going to run out of hydrocarbons. That's not the problem, turns out. We burn about 1 gigaton globally every week. 1 gigaton, about 51 billion tons per year. So, if we want to look at how well we've been doing over the last couple of years, well, this is what the fraction of that budget we ate up in 2018. Here's 2019. 2020, we basically shut the global economy down for a large part of 2020, right? We probably got a 5 to 7% emissions reduction, but a lot of that was offset by wildfires. So there actually wasn't much of a reduction in 2020 even, despite all the economic mayhem. We're not done with 2021 yet, but we're right on target to be about on par with where we were in 2020. So we've eaten up that much of this budget just in these last 4 years. So last kind of big idea that I want to discuss here is that I've been trying to change this conversation a little bit. We've been talking about climate change denial as those people who just overtly refuse to accept the science. They just are going to have none of the science. That's a pretty small percentage of people, though. I mean, we're talking somewhere around 7 to maybe 10% of people overtly refuse to accept the facts. But what I have come to realize that's really changed the way I view the world and how we have to solve this problem is that so many of the rest of us exhibit what I'll call soft forms of climate change denial. We're concerned about the problem, but we're continuing to go on about our everyday lives in ways that continue to perpetuate the problem. And I've got a TEDx talk on this. I published an article in Medium entitled "Surprise, You're Probably a Climate Change Denier." And I kind of think through what these different forms of denial are. One is VIP denial. These folks who think that, well, I'm so important that anything I do, the carbon is just justified. Well, I think we have to rethink that. We often are appealing to technology, and I call this, a tech will fix it denial. There's so many examples of hyping technology that doesn't really come to fruition, or it certainly is not going to come to fruition in a time frame that we need it to. And so I think that tech will fix it mentality is a soft form of climate change denial because it lets the fossil fuels keep flowing. One of the harder ones for me to accept was offsets. Carbon offsets seem like a great idea. You fly, you put a quarter ton of carbon pollution in the air, you pay somebody $10 to plant a tree. The problem is that the accounting on this is terrible at a global scale. And the rates of deforestation have accelerated to the extent that we're not necessarily doing a net good. So I'm not saying don't plant trees. Plant trees, protect blue carbon environments, improve soil health and soil carbon. Those are all great things, but don't do them just so you can burn more carbon. I think that's a form of denial. I read Michael Mann's book, and he makes a great case that doomism is essentially another form of denial because you're kind of denying that you have a role to play. So, I'll throw that out there as just one other big idea that I'd like you to think about. But I just want to spend the last 3 or 4 minutes talking about how things have gone at USU. When the IPCC special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees came out, a number of faculty got together and said, we need to do more. And we started looking into what Utah State was doing, and these are our carbon emissions from 2007 when we initially made the pledge to go carbon neutral by 2050. And the blue line is our total carbon emissions, and the other lines are just showing you different parts of our carbon footprint here. It's a flat line, right? And you could say, well, we've expanded. The atmosphere doesn't care whether we've expanded or not. What the atmosphere cares about is how much carbon pollution we're putting in the air. And we looked at that flat line and said, that's not good enough. We need to be actively reducing, and we need to be doing it quickly, at a rate of about 10% per year to stay in line with expectations of the Paris Agreement. And this all comes on top of the fact that we're in about the richest country in the world. we're at institutions that are supposed to be leading this charge, as Paul just went through very eloquently. That flat line is not good enough. So we tried to have conversations with the administration, and they have always thought of sustainability as this thing that you do when you've got a little extra cash left over. And you throw some sustainability at it, it's great for marketing. That wasn't good enough. So a number of us brought forward a resolution to the Faculty Senate. I got 25 signatories, including the state climatologist, including the person who's the head of the Utah State Water Lab, number of other folks from all across our statewide campuses to say enough is enough. We have to turn the corner on this. And it's strongly worded, and that rubbed some people the wrong way. Some people thought, well, let's just keep our heads down and let's make some changes. But we've been doing that for decades. Doesn't work. We can't let the liars and the cheaters continue to run the dialogue. So students also came up with their own very strongly worded resolution. And president of the university said, okay, let's figure out how to do this. And she formed a greenhouse gas reduction committee. And I won't go through the details of that, but we developed a very detailed plan with the explicit goal that we're going to reduce 10% per year for the next 20 years. That gets us a 90% reduction over those 20 years. That was great. President endorsed it. A month later, COVID starts. So things have moved forward on this. We've made good headway, but a lot of this also got kind of put off to the side, just like we've been seeing happen for decades. As soon as there's something else that drags our attention away, this long-term enormous problem falls off the radar. So we've had to iteratively bring this back up on the radar. We're going to hold the administration accountable for hitting that 10% per year reduction goal. We specify some ways that can be done, but what I've learned over this last 2 years is, it's going to be an iterative process. We're going to go down some roads. That's not going to work out. We need to be ready to pivot. We need to have a lot of plans in play so that when one or two don't work out, we've got other viable options that are going to keep us on that 10% per year pathway. It's been frustrating. I'm happy to talk more about the frustrations we've encountered. It's not part of my job. Every minute I spend doing this is a minute I'm not spending with my daughter, a minute I'm not spending doing research, things like that. But I've continued to do all those things and keep this up as well as I can because it's important. So having said all of that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'd welcome any questions, comments, thoughts.
If you have a question, well, thank you so much, Dr. Belmont and Dr. Lachapelle. If you have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself, type it in the chat, or use the raise hand function.
Somebody wants to ask a question. Oh, is there somebody? Well, I'd be curious, I guess, to hear from some of you folks. How are things going where you are? How do you feel about the progress? One question just came in, but yeah, if anyone wants to respond to that, I'd be interested to hear your answer.
Patrick, maybe I'll defer to you if this is something you have some expertise in.
So the question is, what's the role of human population growth in climate? And if it is a problem, how can we approach it ethically? And, there's no question that the more humans we have, the more carbon we are burning. But I think there are a lot of decisions we've made about how we distribute those energy resources. So Roman Abramovich is one of the wealthier people in the world. He has a yacht that burns about 25,000 metric tons of carbon every year. That's how much carbon pollution he produces just from that one yacht, 25,000 tons. That's equivalent to what 50,000 people in Lagos, Nigeria need for just basic survival. So in this economic system that we've got going, do you think that's right? Do you think that's fair? I think it's much more of a distribution problem than a how many people we have problem. As we're distributing it right now, it's those people who have used the least amount of carbon, who have the least access, who have the least adaptability, that are going to be hit the hardest. So I think getting the fossil fuels turned off as quickly as possible is how we address our population problem ethically. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that.
So Rob Mayer has a question. He says, do the students have good theories about why some universities want to be leaders and other universities choose to be quiet?
Maybe I can take a stab at this. I haven't seen this, although I did look through the Pew research data that I cited, and I think that this is a really interesting area of research to look at, and particularly what the students the student effect is in terms of moving universities in this direction. And I think Patrick referenced the resolution at USU. Montana State University students just passed their student senate just passed a resolution with very strong wording. And so I think what we're starting to see maybe at different universities is students taking the lead and pushing administration, pushing faculty, pushing staff in this direction. And again, I would argue that this is going to be a recruiting tool, that students are looking for universities that are sustainable, that are following, kind of walking the walk. And I think that that's, that there's a bottom line there too from a purely economic point of view. But I'm curious if any students that are joining us today have any thoughts on that.
I know somebody's thinking about responding. They're not unmuting yet. Well, maybe let's leave that open if somebody wants to say something else on that. Please do. I can address the next question from Robert Payne. What were the primary mechanisms by which you plan to decrease the USU carbon emissions? So that whole report is available online. You can see where we started. There were a number of different pathways. One was just really fundamentally changing energy efficiency at USU. I mean, our facilities were planning to be converting over to LED lights over 8 years. We got them to do that conversion over about 1.5 years. And that by itself has significantly reduced our energy demand. It's amazing how much more efficient those are. It's the single cheapest, easiest, biggest impact thing I think any of us can do. We have been negotiating to buy into renewable energy portfolios. So we get some of our energy from Rocky Mountain Power, which is kind of statewide or region-wide. And then we get a lot of our energy on the Logan campus from Logan Light and Power, a small municipal energy firm. Those have been two very different and challenging negotiations, but we have kept at them. And there have been a number of things that we thought were going to work out, and they didn't work out. We go back to the negotiation table. We're close to getting a significant purchase of solar, but that's been another big part of it. Getting faculty to think about air travel is another thing. We don't want to stop everybody from traveling. We couldn't, I don't think, legally stop everyone from traveling, but getting people to think about, flying is the most carbon intensive thing that we do. It's a lot of energy. And, if you're not willing to stop completely, could you think a bit more hard about when is it really essential that you're going to travel, and how can you make the most of that carbon pollution that is inevitably going to be created? So we implemented a small carbon fee. It's $10 per round trip flight. And that's paid for by the president's office, and then that shifts over to departments incrementally over time. It's not meant to deter people from traveling. It's meant to get people thinking about it. So there's a bunch of other things in there, but I won't go into more detail. How does a feeling of futility with regard to the collective action of individuals versus the entire oil and gas industry fit into the overall picture of soft climate denial? Great question. So there's been this big debate about whether individual action matters or whether we just need to be fighting for systemic change. And I think the climate community is very quickly coming around to both of those things matter. Your individual choices, they do matter. So cut where you can, but don't sweat the small stuff. You are not going to solve this problem on your own. So, but I would say any one of us could probably cut a bit without reducing the quality of life that we have. I've cut my own carbon footprint in half. My life is so much better and healthier for it. And a lot of that was cutting out flying and changing some of my dietary. I bought into community solar in my city. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can reduce your own impact. It's good behavior modeling, but don't sweat the small stuff. Don't worry about, I don't want to hear about straws and plastic bags anymore. That's not a significant part of the climate change problem. Plastics have their own problems, but don't, interweave that with the climate problem. For the climate problem, we've got to get the fossil fuels turned off. And so talking with friends, talking with family, talking about your anxieties, talking about your solutions that you want to see, the world you want to live in, calling your representatives. That's where I would tell you to put all those energies beyond what you can relatively easily cut. Sorry if I was blabbing there. So in relation to Robert's chat question, are changes needed at the local government level? For example, implementing building codes that promote heat pumps versus fossil fuel to help the university to make changes? Absolutely. So many of these changes can be made at the local scale. So I'm on my Logan City Sustainability Board now. That's where I chose to put some of that energy, some of that anxiety is into that board. And we just spent the last 2 months arguing about Logan was considering purchasing 12 more years of coal energy with carbon capture and storage. It sounds like a great thing, right? We're going to capture 90% of the carbon and we're going to put it in the ground. It's utter nonsense. It doesn't work. It doesn't capture nearly the amount of carbon that they say they're going to capture. When they do capture that carbon, they put it into oil reservoirs so they can extract otherwise unextractable oil. It's just a shell game as it's implemented right now. Now, I think carbon capture is going to be an important part of the overall solution, but the technology is not there. Promoting it at large scales at this point is just climate change denial. So, battling against Logan buying into that carbon capture and storage scheme took a lot of my time, but I felt it was necessary. It's something I could do at a local scale.
Patrick, I've got a question for you if nobody else is raising their hand or typing. One of the issues we hear here is that, well, we've got to play this Faustian bargain, this deal with the devil. We can't be overt or public about declaring a climate emergency because the legislature will cut off our funding. Now, you come from a conservative state, a red state. I think there were super majorities in both houses of the legislature. Did that question come up for you, and how did you and your colleagues respond?
There were a few murmurs of that as we were working through this, but it never became an important part of the conversation. We certainly have a strongly Republican legislature here. We have a number of climate change deniers, just outright science deniers in our legislature. Doesn't matter. we're here to serve the people. And yeah, there may be ramifications to that. We haven't seen any yet. And most of them are looking at what we're doing and saying, that makes a lot of sense. We're actually saving a lot of money by doing a lot of these energy efficiency things. But I think the overarching philosophy for me is we can't let those people continue to drive the conversation. Be bold, call them out. It's too late to let them continue to drive the conversation. Just leads to more delay.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh, two just came in. Okay, Susan Gallagher asks, does MSU have annual GHG emission and change over time trend data like what Patrick presented for USU?
Yeah, I can mention that. We have data through the STARS system, and I can post that link in just a moment. We have data up through 2016 that's published on the website, and I know that we have more current data that's just not been uploaded yet to that system. But that's a tracking system that tracks a number of kind of sustainability metrics. And what I've noticed is from 2012 to 2019, our trend is similar to what Patrick just showed. That we have made some initial headway when we first started reporting in 2009, 2010. But I think, again, because of our student enrollment numbers increasing, our square footage, our footprint increasing, that's resulted in a flat line in overall emissions.
Okay, and Jean Dixon asks, considering voluntary leadership is critical at this stage, is there hopefully a threshold at which you expect or start to see change be truly institutional? For example, if you stopped putting the pressure on USU at this point, do you expect rollback of the actual gains you have made?
Yeah, great question, Jean. So, it's been 2 years more than a year and a half since we released that greenhouse gas reduction report. And like I said, some of those commitments have moved forward. Others have kind of quietly been set aside. And, COVID was, as I'm sure you all know, it has been and continues to be a difficult thing to deal with. But, I think that the efforts that have already been put in place have created momentum so that there's no way we're going back to where we were. I mean, we have decidedly moved in one direction and we've got a good amount of momentum there. Will we move at the pace that we need to move? That's the big question for me. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I just had the first kind of update meeting with the president a couple of weeks ago. And I gave her my, essentially report card on where I think we're at on all the recommendations. And, some of them we haven't been doing too well at. So I don't think we would roll back, but it will take, without a doubt, continued pressure and accountability to move at the pace that the science says we need to move at. And I'm fully committed to continuing to apply that pressure. And I'm doing that from a position where, I'm a department head. At Utah State, department heads can be dismissed without cause. They don't have to have a reason to say, you're getting a demotion. And it's a pretty significant salary demotion, actually, if I were to be removed as department head. So I'm in a position where I'm putting my own reputation at stake. I'm just trying to stay with the science, stay with what I see as what we need to do. And, I think people have really appreciated that. So.
Robin asks, what critical skills are needed for the climate challenge that students can learn more along with their current area of studies? Is it political science, material science, journalism?
Well, maybe I'll start and I'd love to hear Patrick's response, but Catherine Hayhoe, to reference her again, has given a really interesting TED Talk that, the most important thing that we can do about this, to move this topic this conversation along is to talk about it, to have conversations. And I think this whole area of climate communications, whether it's in the political sciences or maybe the ethical and social justice issues associated with it, for those of us in the sciences, the hard sciences and engineering, a course on communications and how we actually talk to different audiences, I think would be really time well spent from a curriculum point of view for developing those skills. I think that students will need moving forward. Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. So the more I've dug into this, concept of denial, it naturally has led me into thinking about psychology. What's the human psychology that allows us to continue to go down this road? And it's been fascinating to think about, how our own brains are wired and how in some ways they're wired against us, or they're certainly not wired for us dealing with these enormous long-term problems. We have to fight that, evolutionary reality. Understanding some of the mental shortcuts that we use. We have thousands of decisions that we have to make every day. We can't think critically about all of them. So we don't exercise these critical thinking muscles very often. And so we make lots of climate related decisions just based on kind of intuition. Whereas we need to be thinking a little bit more critically. That's how we overcome some of that evolutionary issues. So I would say start absolutely learning more about communication and about the psychology of what helps you communicate effectively to a variety of different audiences. How can you relate to their values and help them connect their values to what needs to happen? Because I don't know anybody who doesn't want to protect this planet and our economy, frankly. So when you get the conversation around to that, you can start to make a lot more progress, I think.